Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story where one of the most radiant gods in the Greek pantheon decides he's tired of simply being admired and wants to be applauded. You can picture him now. Golden light draped across a marble courtyard, a lyre in his hand, eyes glinting with that dangerously familiar mix of charm and ego. Yes, tonight you'll stand beside Apollo, god of music, poetry, medicine, and, apparently, questionable decision-making, as he tries to host a music competition among gods and mortals. And, spoiler alert, it doesn't go great. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy little stories travel across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can smell the sun-warmed marble before you even see him. Apollo lounges at the edge of a vast, sun-bleached courtyard high on Mount Helicon. The wind carries notes of wild time and old myths. His golden hair, the kind poets never shut up about, gleams like polished amber as he hums to himself. Practicing, perhaps, though nobody dares to call it that. Around him, nymphs hover like an adoring chorus, and a few unlucky muses look vaguely worried, as if they've seen this plot before. Because here's the thing about Apollo. He's brilliant, but he's also bored. Being perfect gets repetitive. You win every competition, you charm every mortal, you cure every plague. It starts to lose its shine after the first few millennia. And lately he's been thinking, what's the point of being the god of music if nobody ever gets to prove it against you? So one golden afternoon, as the cicadas buzz like tiny harps, Apollo sits up and says, "I'll host a music contest." That's it. No council meeting, no divine permission slip from Zeus. Just a declaration, and suddenly the air hums with the kind of energy that only spells trouble. You watch as a nearby satyr drops his flute in horror. One of the muses, Calliope, immediately mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Here we go again." Even the olive trees sway uneasily, as though they remember what happened last time Apollo got creative. And yes, there was a last time, though historians still argue whether it ended with spontaneous combustion or just some very offended poets. Apollo, oblivious to their collective dread, paces like a man unveiling a masterpiece. "We'll invite everyone," he declares. "Mortals, nymphs, satyrs, even the lesser gods. Let music unite Olympus and earth." He says it so earnestly that, for a fleeting moment, you almost believe it. But if you've been around the gods long enough, and tonight you certainly have, you know that nothing unites Olympus for long. Especially not when egos and instruments are involved. Still, the news spreads faster than gossip at Dionysus's wine festival. Across valleys and islands, mortals look up from their flutes and lyres with a mixture of terror and excitement. Competing before Apollo himself? It's either the greatest honor imaginable or a beautifully poetic way to die. The muses, reluctantly drafted as event coordinators, start organizing. They set up registration scrolls, performance slots, and something approximating a stage, though really it's just a polished boulder that looks too smug for its own good. One muse complains that they need a sound system, and Apollo, ever the problem solver, invents echoes. Days pass. The amphitheater fills with scaffolds, garlands, and nervous energy. You drift through the preparations like an unseen guest, noting every detail. The lyres being tuned, the harps strung, the panpipes polished to a shine. Every performer seems convinced they're destined for divine recognition, or at least that Apollo might take mercy on them if they play nicely. Meanwhile, Apollo can't stop micromanaging. He insists the flowers be arranged by key, whatever that means. He wants the torchlight to harmonize with the stars. At one point, he even tells a poor satyr to smile in D major. Nobody knows how to do that, but they try anyway. By the third day, even Hermes shows up, not to compete, of course, but to sell overpriced amphorae of official contest wine. He's already printing souvenir amphorae that read Apollo's first music Olympiad. Participant. The word first will later prove painfully optimistic. When night falls, you wander through the half-finished arena, the air thick with jasmine and anticipation. The moonlight spills across the marble, painting everything in soft silver. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a mortal plucking hesitant notes on a lyre, the melody fragile but sincere. You can't help wondering, does Apollo really intend this as a fair contest? Or is this yet another performance, an elaborate mirror held up to his own brilliance? Historians still argue whether Apollo's motives were pure or prideful. Some claim he genuinely wished to celebrate the diversity of music across worlds. Others whisper that he simply wanted to humiliate potential rivals. The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere between the two, gilded, arrogant, and uncomfortably human. On the morning of the grand announcement, Apollo ascends the stage like a sunrise given form. The crowd hushes. Birds stop mid-song, perhaps wisely avoiding comparison. He lifts his lyre, the strings shimmering with divine resonance, and strums a single note so clear it seems to split the sky. This, he proclaims, shall be the greatest celebration of music in history, the purest sounds of heaven and earth united under my guidance. A pause. Also, he adds lightly, I will be performing last. Of course he will. The audience erupts into applause, some genuine, some self-preserving. You can see the mix of awe and dread ripple through the crowd. Somewhere, a mortal whispers, he's performing too? And another replies, then what's the point? And that's when the problems begin. Because even before the first string is plucked, people are already whispering about favoritism. Mortals fear that gods will win automatically. The gods, in turn, scoff that mortals are too fragile to understand divine rhythm. And everyone, absolutely everyone, is afraid to tell Apollo that hosting and competing might be a conflict of interest. Meanwhile, backstage chaos brews. One satyr insists his reed flute deserves its own category. A mortal bard petitions for spoken word to be recognized as a legitimate art form. One nymph brings a seashell that allegedly plays harmonies when held to the ear, though nobody else hears anything except the faint sound of guilt. Apollo, trying to project serenity, declares that all genres are welcome, provided they are beautiful, harmonious, and in good taste. Which, of course, he alone defines. You can almost hear the muses groan. Still, you can't deny the energy, that giddy, pre-disaster hum of something unprecedented. Mortals have journeyed weeks for this, lugging fragile instruments through forests and storms. Even the gods who rarely mingle, Athena, Hermes, Artemis, have arrived, each pretending not to be invested. And yet, behind all the divine grandeur, there's something vulnerable in Apollo's eyes. Maybe he's not just performing for the crowd. Maybe he's performing for himself, trying to prove that beauty, order, and divine perfection can coexist in one shining moment. If so, he's about to learn that art rarely behaves. As dusk settles, torches ignite across the amphitheater. The audience murmurs. The stage glows faintly gold, as if the stone itself anticipates music. Somewhere in the crowd, Dionysus yawns dramatically and opens a wineskin the size of a child. You find a place on the periphery where the breeze carries faint notes of harp tuning and anxious breathing. The stars are gathering overhead like curious spectators. And you realize this isn't just a concert, it's a divine gamble, a test of pride disguised as celebration. You can almost hear fate laughing quietly in the wings, because when gods play games with mortals, the stakes are never just applause. And tonight, as Apollo lifts his shining lyre and calls for silence, you feel the story beginning to stretch, taut as a plucked string, ready to sing or snap. The next morning arrives with the kind of sun that makes everything look just a bit too perfect. Like the gods have hired a lighting crew. The amphitheater gleams, polished marble reflecting the sky, garlands fluttering in the breeze. You step through the crowd, feeling that particular mixture of excitement and dread that always hums before a major event. Somewhere, a satyr is still tuning his panpipes for the 47th time. Somewhere else, a muse is already regretting every life choice that led to becoming Apollo's unpaid intern. The word has gone out. The music contest of the century, no, of eternity, is about to begin. And everyone, mortal or divine, is desperate to prove themselves. From the north, mortals come bearing instruments carved from olive wood and bone. From the islands, nymphs drift in on the breeze, their voices already forming lazy harmonies. Even the minor deities, those half-forgotten gods of obscure hills and oddly specific phenomena, start appearing, brushing dust off their togas and claiming they were invited personally. You can't help but stare at them all. The air feels electric. It's not every day you see a shepherd tuning a lyre beside the god of the winds. Hermes, who has appointed himself official host, flits from one group to another, checking names off a scroll and pocketing bribes in the same motion. All perfectly fair, he assures one contestant, sliding a gold coin into his belt. The gods respect honesty. Behind him, a nervous mortal bard whispers to his companion, "What happens if we lose?" The other man looks up at the cloudless sky. "Depends who we lose to," he murmurs. "If it's Apollo, maybe we just disappear." You think he's exaggerating. Probably. Apollo himself arrives late, of course. He doesn't walk. He arrives, light rippling off his form like he's been polished for the occasion. His aura is so bright you can practically smell sunlight. And as he approaches, the entire amphitheater hushes, as though the world itself knows better than to interrupt him. "Welcome," he says simply. His voice carries without effort, perfectly balanced between warmth and arrogance. Let music bind heaven and earth today. It's a nice sentiment, even if it sounds like something a marketing team would put on a temple poster. The crowd erupts in applause, though a few gods look unconvinced. Dionysus mutters, "Music and wine bind heaven and earth." And Aphrodite, mostly wine. Athena rolls her eyes and says nothing, though you can tell she's already mentally predicting disaster. The contestants line up before the stage, and you can feel their tension like static in the air. A few mortals bow too deeply. One satyr tries to casually flex his calves. Somewhere, a harp string snaps with a pitiful twang, the first omen of the day. And what a lineup it is. First, there's Thamyris, the mortal prodigy who once boasted he could outplay the muses themselves. You can tell by the way he carries his lyre, like it's a weapon, that he hasn't quite learned humility. Historians still argue whether his confidence was bravery or idiocy, though in Olympus those words often overlap. Next there's Pan, the half-goat god of rustic music, looking smug and already chewing on a reed. His instrument of choice, the panpipes naturally, glints like a bundle of sunbeams. He gives Apollo a sly grin that says, "I've beaten you before, or at least annoyed you enough to make it feel like I did." Then there's a mortal woman named Aegle, rumored to have been trained by nymphs and blessed by Echo herself. She looks fragile, but her eyes are steady. You can sense a quiet fire in her. She's not here to worship. She's here to compete. And of course, somewhere in the crowd, hiding behind a fig tree, you catch sight of Marsyas, the satyr who, in certain versions of the myth, will later make a very poor life choice involving Apollo and a flute. He's not performing yet, but he's watching, his fingers twitching restlessly on a borrowed instrument. For now, though, he's just another spectator. A future problem waiting for its turn. As the contestants take their places, the muses flutter anxiously around the stage, tuning, adjusting, soothing, occasionally threatening to quit. You overhear one whisper, "We should have let Dionysus handle this. He at least provides wine for the suffering." Meanwhile, Apollo calls for silence. The amphitheater obeys instantly. Even the wind seems to pause. He raises his hand and gestures toward the first performer. A mortal shepherd who looks like he hasn't slept since the announcement. The man steps forward, his lyre trembling in his hands. "Begin," Apollo says. The mortal plays. It's simple music, awkward, uneven, human. But there's something tender about it, too. You can almost smell the pastures he came from, the smell of sheep and rain in his melody. When he finishes, the audience claps politely, and Apollo nods once, expression unreadable. Next. The next few performances blur together. A nymph's delicate harp piece that makes the air shimmer. A mortal bard reciting poetry so long that Hermes starts selling refreshments halfway through. A small god of thunderclaps performing on drums that nearly collapse the amphitheater. You watch it all from the edge, feeling the tension grow. The gods are starting to get bored, which is never a good sign. When gods get bored, reality tends to pay the price. By midday, Apollo calls for a short break. The performers retreat into the shade, and the audience mills about. You can hear the arguments starting already. That mortal played out of key. You can't outshine a god, it's sacrilege. Who invited the guy with the donkey jawbone? That's not even an instrument. Historians still argue whether this intermission was planned or just necessary to prevent divine rioting. Either way, it gives Apollo a chance to wander among the contestants, looking every bit like a teacher inspecting homework. He pauses beside Pan. "Still using the same pipes, I see." Pan smirks. "They're classic." Apollo's smile doesn't reach his eyes. So is arrogance. You swear the air thickens between them. Their rivalry goes back centuries. Pan's rustic charm versus Apollo's polished perfection. One represents the wild, untamed pulse of nature. The other, divine symmetry. It's like watching jazz challenge classical music to a duel. And yet, beneath the golden god's composed exterior, you sense something else. Uncertainty. For all his confidence, Apollo knows that music has moods even he can't predict. The heart doesn't always follow rules, even divine ones. You drift through the crowd again, noticing how even the gods are gossiping. Athena claims she could play better but refuses to stoop to theatrics. Hermes bets 2 drachmae that Pan will lose spectacularly but somehow spin it into a victory at the next festival. Dionysus just laughs and pours more wine. When the sun dips lower, Apollo claps his hands. "Enough rest," he announces. "Let us continue." You feel the audience settle. a collective inhale before the next act. The next few performers are creative. One mortal tries experimental percussion using amphorae. Another insists that silence itself is music, which earns him a withering stare from Apollo and polite confusion from everyone else. But the real event, you can tell, hasn't started yet. There's a tension in the air, a sense that the true test is still to come. Pan keeps grinning. Apollo keeps pretending not to notice. And somewhere backstage, a satyr named Marsyas is starting to get ideas he really shouldn't. You can almost feel history leaning in. When Apollo finally steps forward to announce the end of the first round, his voice is smooth, effortless. Tomorrow we begin the solos. Each performer will play for judgment. And I, of course, will conclude the contest with my own demonstration. Of course he will. The crowd erupts once more, and you realize that no one, absolutely no one, expects this competition to end peacefully. As twilight settles, you catch Apollo gazing toward the horizon, his expression oddly heavy. Maybe he's starting to sense the storm he's invited. Maybe not. Either way, the stage is set. The gods are restless. The mortals are terrified. And you, caught between admiration and unease, can only wait for the next day's music to begin. Because in Olympus, pride always sets the tempo, and it never ends on a gentle note. By dawn, the amphitheater is already humming again, literally. A low vibration ripples through the marble, as though the very stones are warming up their voices for another day of divine drama. You step into the sunlight, blinking against the glow that spills over Mount Helicon, and you can sense it in the air. This is the day things start to get complicated, because if there's one thing gods are terrible at, it's agreeing on rules. The muses gather around Apollo like a jury of exasperated assistants, each holding a scroll or a quill, or in one case a half-eaten fig, because breakfast was clearly interrupted. We can't start the solos without guidelines. Melpomene sighs, brushing stray parchment dust from her gown. Last night, a mortal tried to claim interpretive dance as a musical genre. Apollo, perched on his marble throne, hums absently, pretending to listen while tuning his lyre. It's the kind of casual disinterest that would get any mortal punched, but on him just looks divine. Rules, he says, are simple. Music is beauty, and beauty reveals itself. We'll know it when we hear it. That's not helpful. You can almost hear the collective groan. The muses exchange looks that say, "Here we go again," because beauty reveals itself is exactly the sort of vague poetry that sounds profound until someone tries to interpret it. Terpsichore, muse of dance, steps forward. So, are we judging by melody, emotion, audience reaction? Apollo waves a hand. Yes. Yes to which? Yes. It's not long before the murmurs begin to spread across the amphitheater. Mortals are confused. Gods are suspicious. And the nymphs have already started betting drachmae on who will throw a divine tantrum first. To make matters worse, Hermes, now apparently the event's self-appointed announcer, starts selling copies of official contest rules, which, upon inspection, turn out to be blank parchment with a gold seal that reads, "No refunds." Still, Apollo insists the contest will proceed. Music, he declares, needs no bureaucracy. And while that's a lovely sentiment, you can tell it's about to go catastrophically wrong. The first performer steps forward, a mortal bard from Corinth who looks like he hasn't eaten in days. He bows so low his forehead nearly brushes the marble and begins to play a slow, melancholy tune. The melody drifts upward like a sigh. You can feel the sincerity in it, every note soaked in longing. When he finishes, the audience gives polite applause. Apollo nods once, Acceptable. The bard beams. Then I pass. Apollo tilts his head. I said acceptable, not exceptional. A ripple of awkward silence passes through the crowd. The bard retreats, muttering something about divine egos and the unfairness of eternal perfection. Historians still argue whether he survived the trip home. Some say he wandered off and became a hermit poet. His others claim he invented the concept of critique. The next performer, perhaps overcompensating, goes in the opposite direction. A nymph whose voice is so sweet it could melt granite. She sings an ode to Apollo himself, which earns her thunderous applause and, not coincidentally, a faintly smug smile from the god. You notice the other contestants exchange looks that could curdle nectar. So much for fairness. Favoritism, someone mutters. Of course he loves songs about himself. Then maybe you should write one, Hermes whispers helpfully, before slipping away to sell wine to the disgruntled. You start to see the pattern forming. The rules aren't just vague, they're designed to orbit Apollo's mood. And his mood, like the weather on Olympus, changes by the minute. By the third performance, confusion reigns supreme. A satyr named Daphon brings a flute carved from elderwood and performs a dizzying, improvised melody that makes half the crowd dance involuntarily. It's raw, wild, and a little unhinged, but undeniably alive. Apollo frowns. Too chaotic. But it made everyone move, protests Daphon. Movement, Apollo replies, is not music. Music is form. You can practically hear Pan snort from across the stage. Then comes a mortal girl who plays a single haunting chord and lets it linger in silence for an entire minute. The crowd is confused, but Apollo looks intrigued. When she finishes, he claps slowly. Interesting, he murmurs. Interesting good or interesting bad, she asks. Interesting, in theory. You can feel the poor girl deflate. Meanwhile, Dionysus has decided to make things more fun by turning the audience into a spontaneous choir. At some point, half the crowd begins singing along with whatever's on stage, which completely derails the next performer. A minor river god who storms off mid-performance, shouting that he's too talented for mortal chaos. It's still early, and already the event is unraveling like a badly tuned lyre string. Historians still argue whether Apollo intended it this way. Some claim he wanted to test the limits of musical definition, to explore harmony beyond mortal comprehension. Others insist he simply had no idea what he was doing and was too proud to admit it. Either way, the confusion reaches a crescendo when Pan himself steps forward. Perhaps, Pan says, flashing a grin sharp enough to cause minor existential crises, we should let the audience decide what beauty is. You can practically see Apollo's jaw tighten. And let mortals judge the divine, Pan shrugs. They're the ones who actually listen. The crowd cheers. Of course they do. Apollo sighs, the sound of a man realizing his event has officially escaped his control. Still, he gestures for Pan to play. Pan raises his pipes. The moment he blows, the air changes. It's wild, earthy, full of laughter and wind. His music doesn't just echo, it moves. The trees sway as if remembering their roots. Birds swoop closer. Even the marble under your feet seems to hum along. When he finishes, there's a long, breathless pause before the crowd erupts. But Apollo doesn't clap. That, he says quietly, was impressive. Pan grins. Almost divine? Almost. And there it is. The single word that turns admiration into insult. Pan's smile falters, and for a heartbeat you think he might just hurl his instrument at the god of light. But he doesn't. Not yet. He bows mockingly low and mutters, "Perhaps next time I'll try being born immortal." The muses exchange uneasy glances. They've seen this story before. And it never ends without someone turning into a tree, a constellation, or worse. Still, the show must go on. The next performers try to reclaim the mood, but the tension lingers. Every note now carries the weight of divine pride. Mortals hesitate before playing, unsure whether to impress or flatter. One brave poet even recites a ballad comparing Apollo's hair to liquid fire, which earns him thunderous applause and a place on next year's calendar. By the end of the day, the amphitheater feels heavy. The sun dips behind the mountains, painting the marble gold and crimson. You can see Apollo watching the sunset, his expression unreadable, caught somewhere between satisfaction and regret. Because for all his glory, he must sense what's coming, a challenge he didn't plan for, and a rival he can't dismiss. As the crowd disperses, whispers ripple through the air. Pan's name lingers. The mortals gossip. Even the gods murmur. And high above it all, Apollo's golden lyre rests silent in his hands, gleaming faintly in the dying light, like an omen waiting for its cue. Tomorrow there will be no ambiguity. Tomorrow there will be a reckoning, set to music. But for now the mountain quiets, holding its breath between verses. And you, still seated among the fading echoes, can't shake the feeling that somewhere in all this celestial chaos, the real song hasn't even started. The next morning dawns with the sound of distant tuning, strings stretching, reeds whining, divine throats humming tentative scales. The amphitheater, still fragrant with yesterday's trampled flowers and spilled wine, glows faintly under the early light. You can tell immediately, everyone's taking this round very seriously. There's a different kind of tension now. Not the wide-eyed excitement of the opening day, but the brittle hush before a storm. The crowd files in slowly, gossip fluttering like moths between marble seats. Mortals clutch their instruments like shields. The gods take their seats with expressions that range from intrigued to outright smug. And at the center of it all, Apollo radiates composure. Too much composure. He's seated cross-legged on a shining bench of white stone, his lyre beside him, a faint half-smile tugging at his mouth. It's the smile of a man who knows he's untouchable, or at least believes he is. The muses take their places again, each armed with fresh scrolls and the look of overworked bureaucrats on their second week of a divine audit. Hermes floats nearby, assisting with crowd control, though his idea of assistance mostly involves selling snacks and maps of where to faint dramatically for best visibility. You find your seat along the outer ring, next to a mortal scholar scribbling frantic notes on the back of a wine invoice. This, he mutters, will be the greatest cultural event of our age. Then, more softly, assuming no one dies. You don't answer. You're not sure he's wrong. Apollo rises, lifting one hand to command silence. The amphitheater stills instantly. His voice rings out clear and warm as sunlight. Today, he announces, we move from harmony to truth. Let each performer reveal not just skill, but soul. It's a lovely line, poetic, rehearsed, and dangerously vague. The first performer steps forward, a young mortal woman with a lyre nearly her own size. Her name, someone whispers, is Lycris, a farmer's daughter from Thebes who won her local harvest festival 3 years in a row. Her fingers tremble slightly as she begins to play. The melody is simple, pastoral, lilting, full of sunlight and river breeze. You can almost see the fields through her sound, the way it ripples with gentle pride. When she finishes, there's a hush. Even the gods seem momentarily softened. Apollo nods. A song of the earth, imperfect but honest. Lycris bows, glowing, and steps aside. Next comes a mortal poet, all drama and wild gestures, who performs a chanted epic about Persephone's descent into the underworld. It's stirring, clever, and, unfortunately, about someone else's divine tragedy. Hades' wife's name is barely out of his mouth before Persephone herself materializes in the stands, arms crossed. "Really?" she says flatly. The poet stammers. "It's an homage." "To what, my trauma?" Dionysus bursts into laughter so loud it echoes off the cliffs. The poet flees before Apollo can even judge him. Historians still argue whether this was the first official disqualification in divine music history or just an impromptu lesson in reading the room. The contest moves on. A trio of nymphs performs an intricate harmony on crystal flutes that shimmer with dew. A mortal bard uses a shell as percussion and insists it represents the heartbeat of Poseidon. Poseidon, notably, is unimpressed. One ambitious satyr tries to play 12 instruments at once, an act that ends in disaster and minor concussions. It's a carnival of ambition, and Apollo seems to enjoy watching it unfold. But beneath his smooth exterior, there's a flicker of restlessness. You can tell. His fingers tap impatiently against his knee, keeping time to an invisible rhythm only he can hear. And then at last, the stage belongs to Pan. He steps forward barefoot, reeds in hand, grin already loaded like a weapon. The crowd leans in, the gods perk up, even the birds hush. Pan doesn't bow. He doesn't need to. He lifts his panpipes, breathes in the mountain air, and begins to play. The sound is wild, unshaped, untamed, alive. It rushes through the amphitheater like a river breaking its banks. The melody twists, dips, and soars, full of laughter and ache, as though the forest itself were trying to speak. You feel your chest tighten, not from awe, but from something older, something primal. Pan's music doesn't care about perfection. It feels like the world before gods learned to measure beauty and symmetry. It smells of bark, moss, and freedom. When it ends, the silence is thunderous. Then comes applause. First the mortals, then the nymphs. Then hesitantly, even a few gods. Apollo doesn't move, he just watches Pan, golden and still, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that might be respect or annoyance. Finally, he says softly, "It is interesting." Pan smirks. "Still almost divine?" "Almost." Apollo replies, though his tone this time is colder. And there it is again, that dangerous word. You can feel the tension spark like flint. Pan's grin tightens, his fingers flexing on his pipes. "Maybe," he says, "perfection isn't the same as passion." A murmur ripples through the amphitheater. That's a bold thing to say to the god of perfection. Apollo's eyes narrow. And maybe chaos isn't the same as creativity. Pan chuckles softly. "Careful, brother. The forest hears arrogance before it hears melody." And that's it. The unspoken challenge bursts into the air like a lightning strike. Even Hermes, sensing profit, starts strapping betting odds on a scrap of parchment. Dionysus cheers. Finally, a duel. The crowd roars in agreement. Apollo exhales slowly. "Very well," he says. "A contest between us. You may choose the order." Pan bows. "You first, golden boy." The amphitheater stills, vibrating with anticipation. Apollo rises, lifting his lyre, and the air shifts. When he strums, light itself bends. Each note bursts like sunlight refracted through crystal, pure, mathematical, overwhelming. The sound wraps the crowd in golden warmth, precise and flawless. Birds freeze mid-flight, the marble hums beneath your feet. Even the wind seems to hesitate, unsure whether to dance or kneel. When he finishes, the world feels cleaner. Perfect, and maybe colder. Pan steps forward again, raises his pipes, and plays. His melody begins where Apollo's ends, not as rebuttal, but as rebellion. His music slips through the cracks in perfection, like ivy between stones. It's messy, raw, alive. The two sounds clash and merge, divine order and wild rhythm, until the air trembles with contradiction. You can feel your pulse sync with both at once, your body torn between awe and abandon. When the last note fades, the crowd erupts into chaos. Some cry Apollo, others shout Pan, a few just collapse overwhelmed. Historians still argue who won that round. The stories differ. Some say Apollo triumphed with divine grace, others claim Pan's rawness swayed the hearts of the crowd. The truth? It's somewhere in the noise between them. Apollo, lips pressed thin, gives a shallow nod. A fine effort. Pan grins. See? Almost divine. Then, bowing mockingly low, he adds, "Perhaps the god of music has finally met his echo." The insult hangs in the air, gleaming like a blade. Apollo doesn't respond. Not yet. He just turns away, the sunlight around him dimming slightly, as though the sky itself is uneasy. You realize you're holding your breath. Everyone is. Something in the story has shifted, subtly, dangerously. The contest is no longer about music. It's about pride, about power, about the one thing gods and mortals share most deeply, the desperate need to be seen. As night falls, the amphitheater empties in uneasy silence. Somewhere in the distance, you can still hear Pan's melody echoing faintly through the trees, wild and triumphant. Apollo stands alone on the stage, his shadow long across the marble. For the first time, he looks uncertain, as though he's glimpsed a world that doesn't quite worship him. He plucks one last note on his lyre. The sound is flawless, but this time, it feels hollow. By dawn, the contest had become something much larger and much pettier than Apollo had ever intended. What began as a celebration of harmony was now an ongoing feud disguised as a festival. You could feel it in the air. The gods whispered, the mortals schemed, and the muses kept pretending they were just the record keepers, when everyone knew they were secretly taking sides. Even Hermes, who had been unofficial snack vendor and chaos consultant, now sold little clay trinkets shaped like Pan's pipes and Apollo's lyre. "Buy both," he told you cheerfully, "so you can still say you backed the winner." The amphitheater itself had changed overnight. Someone had hung garlands of ivy around Pan's section of the stage, while Apollo's followers draped everything else in gold ribbons and laurel leaves. The result looked like two rival wedding receptions colliding at high speed. Still, Apollo managed to look composed, painfully so. When he arrived that morning, sunlight flared around him as though the world itself had decided to filter him for dramatic effect. He smiled, thanked the crowd, and announced that the next round would test not just melody, but interpretation. He might as well have said, "Let's see who can insult me most artistically." The theme of the day, divine inspiration. Each performer was asked to create a song or poem in honor of the gods. Predictably, most of them chose to honor Apollo himself. The first was a young bard from Corinth who sang a glowing ode about how even the dawn blushes in envy of Apollo's radiance. It was technically perfect and emotionally empty. Apollo clapped politely but looked faintly bored, like a teacher grading essays written by students who discovered flattery at breakfast. Then came a sculptor-turned-poet who, for reasons unknown, tried to perform a spoken-word piece about the geometries of divine beauty. It involved a lot of dramatic pacing and hand gestures that accidentally knocked over a lyre stand. He received scattered applause and one pity laurel from Calliope. But then, of course, Pan's turn came. He strolled onto the stage barefoot again, twirling his pipes lazily, and gave Apollo a grin that could start small wars. "My song," he announced, "is also about a god." Apollo inclined his head. Naturally, Pan raised a finger, "But not you." You could feel the air tighten. Even the cicadas stopped. My song, Pan continued, is about Dionysus, god of wine, laughter, and things that don't make sense but feel right anyway. A low chuckle rolled through the crowd. Dionysus looked deeply pleased with himself, already half drunk and waving a grape cluster like a royal scepter. Pan began to play. The music was different this time, slurred, playful, irregular. It swayed rather than marched, bending notes in directions that made Apollo visibly wince. The rhythm was unsteady, but full of life, like a bonfire's dance or a heartbeat after too much celebration. It wasn't flawless, it wasn't divine, but it was alive. By the end, half the audience was clapping off beat, laughing uncontrollably, and Dionysus had joined in with his own tambourine made of a wine bowl in questionable confidence. When it ended, the amphitheater shook with applause. Pan bowed with mock elegance. "My apologies, Apollo." The god of joy asked for a little chaos. Apollo's smile was a mask made of sunlight. Indeed, chaos has its place. He turned to the muses, who pretended to look neutral but clearly weren't. "Let us continue." Next came a mortal poet who, bless his ambition, decided to perform a ballad about both gods, trying desperately to reconcile Apollo's order and Pan's wilderness. It started well enough, but somewhere around verse 8, he began sweating profusely, tripped over a metaphor about sunlight kissing bark, and fainted dramatically mid-stanza. Hermes immediately offered to sell commemorative scrolls of the poet who tried. The contest spiraled from there. A troupe of dancers reenacted the creation of the world using interpretive movement, which mostly looked like a fist fight in slow motion. A mortal woman performed an opera so long that even the fates started cutting thread just to pass time. And when a group of fauns tried to remix Apollo's own melody with woodland drums, the god's temple bells mysteriously began ringing out of tune for the rest of the day. It was subtle, but no one missed the message. Behind the polite smiles and graceful applause, something sharper was building. Every song, every verse, every laugh was another spark in the slow-burning fire of divine rivalry. By late afternoon, you could see it even in the light. Apollo's sun seemed to shine hotter, harsher, while Pan's shadows grew longer and more confident. At one point, during a mortal's tragic elegy for a lost shepherd, a small fight broke out between two groups of fans, one chanting Apollo and the other Pan. It was quickly broken up, though Hermes somehow sold them both official supporter garlands. Before they stopped arguing, you begin to realize that no one actually remembers why the contest started. It's no longer about beauty or music. It's about pride, about proving whose world, marble or moss, matters more. As twilight deepens, the muses call for a recess. The audience spills out into the temple gardens, chattering, arguing, gossiping. Apollo stands alone at the edge of the stage, watching Pan laugh with Dionysus and Hermes over a shared wineskin. His expression doesn't change, but the sunlight around him flickers. Just for a heartbeat. You don't need prophecy to see what's coming. The god of music isn't used to being challenged. And Pan has just discovered that nothing delights him more than watching perfection crack. Tomorrow's round, you think, won't be about art at all. It'll be about vengeance set to melody. You'd be right. Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the hush of an ancient desert. The kind of silence that feels older than sound itself. The air is dry enough to steal your breath, and every grain of sand carries a whisper of something that once lived, once prayed, once wrote. You stand at the edge of Thebes, or maybe Memphis. It's hard to tell. Time here folds like papyrus under the sun. The horizon glows with the last orange sigh of sunset, and in front of you rises a limestone complex with columns like frozen reeds. Per Ankh, the House of Life. It's not just a library, it's the mind of Egypt bound in scrolls. You probably won't survive this. Not the heat, not the gods, not the bureaucracy. The priests will insist you copy every syllable with divine precision, and you'll nod politely while your hand cramps into a claw. But for now, you stand outside the great doors, smelling ink, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old bronze prayers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your city and the time where you are right now. I love seeing how far this little midnight caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door creaks open. A dry breath escapes, carrying the scent of papyrus, cedar oil, and old ambition. You step inside. The chamber is cool, impossibly still. Oil lamps sputter in niches carved with falcons, eyes, and stars. Shadows move like ink poured across stone. The scribes barely glance up. They've been here since dawn, bent over scrolls, whispering lines that could resurrect kings or condemn them to oblivion. Your first impression is of order. Rows of shelves stacked with scrolls, each labeled in hieratic script: medicine, astronomy, hymns to Ra, legal decrees. But then you notice the chaos beneath the order. Stray reeds, scraps of papyrus, smudged ink stains that look suspiciously like hieroglyphic cursing. It's less of a temple and more of a cosmic paperwork nightmare. A senior scribe greets you with a look that says, "Ah, another soul doomed to the bureaucracy of eternity." His name might be Hori or Jehutimos. It doesn't matter. Every librarian here eventually blurs into one figure, stooped, ink-stained, eyes like faded moonlight. He leads you past statues of Thoth, god of writing, whose ibis head gleams in the lamplight. Before you touch a reed pen, Hori murmurs, you must understand, words are not symbols, they are lives. Each glyph is a god's echo. Copy carelessly, and you wake something better left sleeping. You nod solemnly, trying to ignore the bead of sweat rolling down your neck. Here's your first mainstream historical fact of the night. The House of Life wasn't just a library, it was also a temple school, a hospital, and a record office. Every royal decree, medical recipe, and astronomical chart passed through these walls. The ancient Egyptians believed writing itself maintained the balance of Ma'at: order, truth, cosmic harmony. Forgetting a word wasn't just sloppy, it was dangerous. Your first task is simple: grind ink. You kneel before a basalt slab and begin to mix soot with gum arabic and a drop of Nile water, turning it into a black syrup. The scent is strangely sweet, like burnt honey. Never use river water, Ori warns, unless you know which gods have swum in it. You nod again, not entirely sure whether he's joking. Then comes your first fringe tidbit. Some papyri describe magical inks made from crushed beetles, oxidized copper, and even powdered mummies. You try not to think about that as you stir. Once the ink is ready, you're handed a bundle of reeds. The nib must be cut at exactly the right angle. Too sharp and it'll tear the papyrus. Too dull and the gods will roll their eyes. You practice on scraps, the lines wobbling like baby snakes. Better, Hori mutters. Now, breathe before every stroke. Writing is inhalation, meaning comes on the exhale. By mid-morning, your wrist aches. The scribes around you chant softly as they copy hymns to the sun god Ra. It's mesmerizing, an ocean of whispers rising and falling like a tide. The papyrus rustles in rhythm. You begin to lose sense of where you end, and the words begin. Every so often, a priest drifts through, inspecting your work. You notice how each scroll is tied with colored string: red for medicine, blue for rituals, green for agriculture. Somewhere in the corner, an apprentice sneezes. The entire room freezes. One of the older scribes mutters, "Careful. Words can hear you." You think he's joking until a gust of wind, impossible indoors, flickers every lamp. A scroll unravels itself across the floor. "It happens," Hori says casually. The library dislikes distractions. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The walls begin to shimmer with heat. You pause to stretch and glance through the doorway. The courtyard beyond is blinding white marble, dotted with lotus pools. The sound of reed flutes drifts faintly from somewhere, maybe a funeral, maybe lunch. You start to understand something unspoken. This isn't just a workplace, it's a ritual of continuity. Every scroll you copy preserves the empire's heartbeat. Lose a word, and a city might vanish from history. Historians still argue whether these libraries were accessible to the public or reserved only for priests. But standing here, ink-stained and sweating, you're pretty sure the answer is definitely not public. You can barely breathe, let alone ask for directions. Midday arrives. Bread and dates appear on a low table. You eat quietly, listening to gossip. Which priest misplaced the latest hymn? Who's been stealing lamp oil? And the scandalous rumor that someone's been sketching cats in the margins of legal decrees again. "Thoth, forgive us," Hori mutters. "Even librarians need amusement." After lunch, you're assigned to copy an astronomical chart. The papyrus stretches across the table, a map of stars painted in indigo. You trace the constellations: crocodile, scorpion, lotus, sailboat. The Egyptians believed that reading the heavens could predict the flood, the harvest, even the fate of Pharaoh himself. As your hand moves, you feel the old rhythm returning. Inhale, exhale, line, curve, dot. The lamps burn lower. The air grows thick with incense and sweat. Someone hums softly, a lullaby for the gods of ink. Then, just as your eyes start to blur, Hori leans close and whispers, "Do you hear it yet?" "Hear what?" "The silence between words. That's where the gods live." You listen. The room hums faintly, the papyrus crackles, the ink dries, the lamps hiss, and beneath it all, something vast and patient breathes. Night falls. The scribes finish their prayers, rolling each scroll with care. They place them in clay jars lined with cedar oil to keep out insects. The lids click shut, sealing time itself inside. You linger behind, brushing stray papyrus fibers from your robe. Through a narrow window, the desert glows silver under the moon. The wind sings softly across the dunes, like pages turning in a book no one remembers writing. For the first time, you realize what you've joined isn't a job, it's an unbroken lineage. You're one link in a chain stretching from the dawn of writing to whatever comes after humanity itself. And as you blow out your lamp, a final thought drifts through your mind. In this place, nothing truly dies. It just waits to be read again. The next morning begins long before the sun dares to appear, when the sky is still a dull band of blue and the Nile exhales its mist over the sleeping fields. You wake to the sound of sandals on stone, someone sweeping the courtyard, someone else murmuring the hymn that greets the day. Your body aches from sitting hunched over the papyrus yesterday. But there's no time to complain. You're expected at the scriptorium before dawn. You step outside. The air tastes of cold clay and smoke. The first birds start their chatter, though you can't see them yet, and the stars fade reluctantly, as if even they want to linger over the temple. Inside, the lamps are already lit. The scribes move like ghosts through the dimness, their linen robes whispering. Today is about discipline, the art of ink, breath, and ritual. You learn quickly that nothing in this place happens casually. Even breathing must be measured, symmetrical, deliberate. Before the first stroke of the day, Every scribe recites a small prayer to Thoth. Grant that my hand be steady and my meaning pure. You join in, your voice low and uncertain. Around you the others sound confident, melodic, like a choir of ink and dust. The master scribe, Hori, inspects your workstation. Remember, he says, tapping the reed pen, this is not a tool. It is an artery. The ink is your blood. The words are what keep the world alive. He says this so often you suspect he might actually mean it. Your first task is to prepare the ink again. But today you're allowed to mix red pigment as well. Hematite, ground fine as sand, bound with gum, and stirred into a paste. Red ink is used for divine names, titles, and warnings. Never write a god's name in black, Hori reminds you, unless you want him to visit personally. You laugh softly. He doesn't. There's a faint tremor in your hands as you dip the reed into the ink. You exhale. The line comes out clean this time, smooth, elegant. Hori nods approvingly. Now you may write. Your assignment is a copy of the Instruction of Ptahhotep, a text that was already ancient in the time of pyramids. It's a collection of moral advice. Be humble, respect elders, don't gossip about the priests. That one gets the most eye rolls. You whisper each word as you copy it, letting the rhythm carry you. Do not be arrogant because of your knowledge, but confer with the ignorant man as with the learned. The irony isn't lost on you. Every few minutes, another scribe hums a line from a hymn, creating a strange, sleepy symphony of murmurs and scratching. The smell of ink fills your head until it feels like part of your bloodstream. Here's your historical fact of the night. Ancient Egyptian scribes used palettes with two hollows, one for red ink, one for black, and carried them as symbols of their profession, much like a modern doctor's stethoscope. Some even had them buried alongside their owners, as if eternity required paperwork. By mid-morning, the sun pierces through the high windows, slicing the air into bright gold columns. Dust motes drift like lazy planets. Your scroll grows longer, and your mind drifts with it. You begin to wonder who will read your work centuries from now. Maybe no one. Maybe someone will dig it up, mispronounce your name, and call you anonymous. The thought stings a little. During the midday rest, you sneak out to the courtyard. The temple's white walls glow so fiercely you have to squint. You dip your hands into a basin of cool water and splash your face. Across the courtyard, an older scribe named Passer is drawing lines in the dust with a stick. Measuring the world, he says when you ask. Every line we draw is an imitation of creation. Even Thoth had to start with geometry. You nod like you understand, though honestly, you're just trying not to pass out from the heat. Then comes the fringe tidbit. Passer tells you entirely straight-faced that some scribes believed the gods actually read over their shoulders. If your handwriting pleased them, he says, they might guide your pen. But if it offended them, he trails off, wiggling his fingers ominously. Your ink turns to water. You laugh, but that night, when your pen suddenly blots across a sacred name, you swear the temperature drops. The work continues, endless and meticulous. You learn how to hold your breath mid-stroke so your lines don't tremble. You learn the rhythm of the lamp flames, how their flicker times your writing pace. You even learn how to rest your elbow on a folded cloth to avoid bruising. It's monkish, meditative, but also exhausting. At one point, the master scribe tells a story about a temple library so vast it needed an army of cats to protect it from mice. And when the cats died, he adds, they were mummified with honors. You glance toward the shadows where one temple cat sits, licking its paw. You give it a nod of respect. It blinks back. unimpressed. The hours pass. Your back stiffens, your eyes ache, and yet there's something addictive in the repetition. Each glyph you copy feels like a heartbeat in an endless continuum. You imagine the scroll unrolling into the future, your name hidden somewhere inside it like a secret prayer. Historians still argue whether these scribal rituals were spiritual devotion or just ancient quality control. But to you, it's both. You can feel something in the rhythm, a current pulling you deeper, like you're not just writing history, but entering it. Late afternoon. Hori dismisses the apprentices to stretch their legs, but you stay behind. You've started to enjoy the solitude, the faint hiss of the ink drying. You stare at the papyrus, noticing how it shimmers slightly in the dim light, the fibers aligned like muscle tissue. For a moment, you think you see movement, letters rearranging themselves, forming new words. You blink. It's gone. Careful, says a voice behind you. It's Passer again. That's how it starts. How what starts? He shrugs, the library talking back. You wait for him to smile, but he just walks away, humming under his breath. That night, you join the other scribes in the refectory. The meal is simple: lentils, onions, beer sweetened with date syrup. The talk is quiet but lively. Someone complains that their pen split during a sacred hymn. Another boasts of copying the Book of the Dead without a single error. Hori raises an eyebrow. "And the gods didn't smite you?" he teases. "No," the young scribe says, grinning. "They're probably illiterate." Everyone laughs, then immediately looks toward the statue of Thoth, just in case. After dinner, you walk to the rooftop. The desert night stretches infinite, cold, alive with stars. The constellations you copied earlier now blaze overhead, reminding you that every map is only a shadow of what it tries to describe. You feel very small, but also strangely eternal. There's a breeze tonight, carrying the faint scent of the river and burning resin. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. Somewhere below, a reed flute plays a slow, mournful tune. You hum along softly until the sound blends with your breath. You remember Hori's words. Writing is inhalation. Meaning comes on the exhale. So you breathe, and the world seems to exhale with you. And maybe, just maybe, you hear something breathing back. The next day, the heat returns with an authority you can taste. It seeps into your bones, crawls under your robe, and turns the air into liquid amber. You sit cross-legged before the shelves, where the scent of ink mixes with the faint, almost sweet decay of papyrus. There's no breeze today, only the hum of flies and the quiet scratch of pens on scrolls. Your job this morning is cataloging. That sounds dull until you realize these scrolls aren't simple reading material. Each one is a coiled serpent of secrets. You unroll a bundle marked with the symbol of a lotus, expecting herbal medicine. But inside are recipes for preserving hearts after death, lists of planetary alignments, and instructions for summoning protective spirits that smell of myrrh and lightning. You glance toward the door, half expecting a priest to appear and accuse you of curiosity. A practical note first. Most houses of life really did serve as archives for every imaginable topic. Astronomy, medicine, ritual, even taxation. The Temple of Edfu alone reportedly held more than 100,000 scrolls. It's almost comforting, knowing that ancient civilization was already drowning in paperwork. You lift a scroll that's so brittle it sighs in your hands. The ink shimmers faintly. "Don't breathe too hard," says Hori, who's standing behind you. Some of them remember. You try to laugh, but your throat's dry. The rule here is simple. Never read aloud what you don't understand. The spoken word has power, And certain words, so they say, were designed to work. Healing charms, curses, love spells, resurrection formulas, the wrong syllable and you might resurrect the wrong thing. You handle each scroll as if it's alive, whispering a small apology when you roll it back up. Near noon, you come across one wrapped in faded blue linen. There's no label, which already makes your skin tighten. You hesitate, then unroll it slowly. The writing isn't hieratic, it's something older, angular, almost like tiny thorns arranged in spirals. The illustrations are stranger still. Stars inside human figures, snakes emerging from mouths, a diagram of a man splitting into two silhouettes. "What's this?" you whisper. Hori peers over your shoulder. His face stays calm, but his hand tightens on the table. "Not for novices," he says, and rolls it shut again. "Put it back. The priests of Heliopolis keep that one sealed for a reason." You want to ask what reason, but his expression tells you the answer won't make you sleep better. Here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found papyri describing how to charm scorpions by speaking their language. Another text advises writing spells in honey on the tongue to sweeten a lover's heart. You imagine explaining that in modern dating terms. "Hey, hold still, I just need to write hieroglyphs on your molars real quick." As the day drags on, the library feels heavier, as if the scrolls themselves lean closer. You notice tiny carvings on the shelves, ibises, eyes, hands, protective glyphs burned into the wood. One shelf bears a crack that looks suspiciously like a mouth. You tell yourself it's a trick of light. After lunch, Hori assigns you to assist with indexing the medical papyri. The senior physician, a scribe named Jennifer, looks perpetually annoyed, as if healing the living is an unfortunate distraction from perfect handwriting. He dictates remedies while you jot them down. To cure headache, mix willow bark with crushed dates. To treat burns, apply honey and grease of goose. Then he pauses. To drive away ghosts, he adds casually, smear natron on the doorframe and hang garlic by the lintel. You glance up. "Ghosts?" He frowns. "What else do you think causes a fever?" Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly believed diseases were spirits or just poetic metaphors. Judging by Chonifer's tone, it's not a metaphor today. By mid-afternoon, the air is thick enough to chew. You escape to the shade of the courtyard and find Passer reclining by a column, reading something that looks suspiciously non-medical. "What are you doing?" you ask. He smirks. "Checking the celestial archives." It's an astronomy scroll, covered in constellations you've never seen. There's Orion, sure, but also the flaming goose, the river of souls, and something labeled the one who waits beneath. You raise an eyebrow. "Not official charts," Passer admits, "just the fun ones." He points at a cluster of dots. "That's where they say the first words of creation are stored. If you knew how to read them, you could speak them again." You blink. "And why would you want to?" He shrugs. "For the same reason we copy everything. To see if we can." A shadow crosses the sun. It's only a vulture circling lazily, but somehow it fits the conversation perfectly. You return inside just as Hori gathers the scribes for inspection. He checks every label, every seal. One jar catches his attention. It's cracked, the lid crooked. Inside lies a scroll written in red and black, but the ink glows faintly as if still drying. "Who cataloged this?" he demands. No one answers. The silence grows taut. You glance around. Everyone suddenly finds their sandals fascinating. Ori sighs. "Seal it, triple wax, and move it to the north shelf." Later, when the others drift away, you whisper, "What was that?" "Don't ask," he mutters. "Some knowledge grows teeth." You make a mental note. North shelf, never touch. As evening settles, you're assigned to clean the lower archives, a dim corridor beneath the main hall where old scrolls molder in clay jars. The air smells of rot and lamp oil. You work by lamplight, brushing off cobwebs. Your hand grazes something slick. An overturned jar, its scrolls half-rotted. The writing's gone, the papyrus melted into a single dark sheet. You stare at it, realizing that thousands of hours, maybe lifetimes, have been erased by water and mold. The weight of that loss presses on your chest. You sit there for a while, breathing the dust of forgotten words. For the first time, you feel protective, furious even. All this knowledge, so fragile, so mortal. You vow silently that if the gods ever flood this place again, you'll build a second library somewhere the water can't reach. You finish the cleaning, hands trembling. The lamps above flicker, and for an instant, you think you see faint letters glowing on the ruined scroll, an after-image of ink refusing to die. Then the light steadies and it's gone. You take that as a good sign, or a warning. Hard to tell anymore. Back in your chamber, you wash your hands in perfumed water and watch the ink spiral away like tiny galaxies. Somewhere in the next room, someone snores softly. Outside, a jackal yips at the moon. You stretch, lie down, and stare at the ceiling. In the silence, you can almost hear it again, that faint whisper beneath everything. Maybe it's the scrolls. Maybe it's the gods. Maybe it's the desert itself, murmuring that nothing written ever truly disappears. It just changes form. You close your eyes, and the darkness feels like ink waiting for the next word. The next week drifts by in that strange, timeless rhythm the library enforces. Dawn, ink, prayer, dust, sleep, repeat. Days lose their edges. You stop counting them. The house of life has swallowed you whole. And then one morning, everything tilts. The temple courtyard buzzes louder than usual. Priests march in crisp formation. Soldiers patrol near the gates. An uncommon sight. You sense something brewing before anyone says a word. When you reach the scriptorium, Hori's expression confirms it. Today's work won't be the quiet kind. On the central table lies a new decree, sealed with the royal cartouche. It smells of fresh beeswax and power. The pharaoh himself has ordered an audit of temple archives. You don't have to be a prophet to translate that. Censorship, reorganization, and probably a few missing scrolls before sunset. You exchange uneasy glances with the other scribes. The pharaoh's advisors aren't fond of texts they can't control, especially ones about dangerous magic, subversive history, or non-approved gods. The inspection begins this afternoon, Hori says grimly. Everything unregistered goes to the restricted vaults. Everything heretical goes to the flames. You stare at the shelves around you. Hundreds of scrolls, thousands even. Every jar holds a heartbeat of memory, and now someone's about to silence half of them. By midday, the royal envoys arrive. Their sandals are spotless, their eyes calculating. They carry spears and tablets. "We are here on behalf of Pharaoh Seti, beloved of Ra," the chief inspector announces. "We will ensure the purity of knowledge preserved in this house." Purity. That word lands like a curse. The inspection begins. You and the others unroll scrolls under their gaze, reading titles aloud. Treatise on grain storage. List of temple donations. On the proper mummification of cats. Safe enough. Then one of the inspectors points to a sealed jar labeled Rituals of the Hidden Sun. You freeze. That collection includes hymns to a forbidden deity, Aten, the sun disk worshipped during the heretic king Akhenaten's reign. Even centuries later, that name carries danger. You try to keep your breathing steady. Old astronomy, you say quickly. mostly obsolete. Open it. You hesitate, but the order leaves no room. The inspector watches closely as you untie the linen cords. Inside, a faint whiff of myrrh escapes, mixed with something like ozone. The scroll glints faintly red in the lamplight. You pray silently to Thoth that the ink has faded enough to look harmless. It hasn't. The first line blazes with Aten's symbol, carved in gold pigment, a radiant disk with hands extended. The inspector's face tightens. "This," he says, "is blasphemy." "Historical reference," you offer, too fast. He doesn't answer. He gestures to a soldier. "Take it." The scroll is rolled up, sealed again, this time not for preservation, but for destruction. That night, the courtyard smells of burning papyrus. You stand at a distance, watching the smoke curl upward, carrying words into the indifferent stars. You tell yourself they're only symbols, only ink. But you know better. Each spark feels like a heartbeat snuffed out. Hori joins you, silent for a while. Then he says, "Do you know what's worse than forgetting?" You shake your head, pretending to remember what never was. He walks away before you can answer. "Here's your historical fact. Pharaoh Seti I truly did restore the old pantheon after Akhenaten's heresy, erasing his memory from monuments and records alike. The priests of Amun called it the Great Restoration. History calls it editing." Later that evening, when the guards finally leave, a few scribes remain behind under the guise of sweeping ashes. Hori beckons you to follow him through a narrow side corridor. At the end lies a hidden door behind a faded mural of Thoth weighing hearts. He pushes it open, revealing a low chamber lit by one trembling lamp. Inside are sealed jars, hundreds of them, some labeled, some blank. "These," he whispers, "are the things we don't burn." You realize what he's done. A secret archive, heretical hymns, banned philosophies, forgotten spells, all hidden under the noses of the priests. "Why tell me?" you ask. "Because someone must remember where they are." He smiles faintly. "And you're the only one naive enough to care." You help him reseal the jars, covering them with clay dust to make them look ancient. It feels thrilling, dangerous, right? Before leaving, Hori hands you a small papyrus scrap. "Keep this," he says. You unroll it later by lamplight. It's a fragment of the Book of Thoth, a mythical text said to contain all the secrets of heaven and earth. The handwriting is delicate, looping, his own. You read the single line written there. "To write is to defy forgetting." You tuck it into your robe. Days pass. The inspectors move on, satisfied that the house of life is once again pure. You return to your work, but everything feels different now. Every word you copy carries new weight, as if aware it might be the last of its kind. Even the other scribes grow quieter. Some look relieved, others haunted. Passer mutters one evening, "What's the point of knowledge if no one dares to read it?" You have no answer. Historians still argue whether temple libraries were ever purged, but the charred fragments found in ancient Thebes suggest someone, somewhere, decided which truths deserve to survive. One night, you wake to distant thunder. Except it isn't thunder. It's the roar of the river swollen from distant rains. The Nile, relentless and alive, surges closer to the temple walls. You rush to the archives, heart hammering. The lowest storerooms, where you and Hori hid the secret jars, are already damp. Together, you work by torchlight, lifting jars onto higher shelves, wrapping them in oilcloth. The water keeps rising, lapping at your ankles. The torch sputters. Somewhere outside, priests shout prayers to Hapi, the flood god. At one point, Hori slips, dropping a jar. It shatters, spilling fragments of papyrus into the dark water. You both freeze, watching the ink bleed out like veins. He curses softly. They always win, he says. Who? The gods, the kings, the bureaucrats, take your pick. You help him up, and for a second, the torchlight catches his face. There's something like pride there, but also resignation. Still, he murmurs, we save what we can. By dawn, the water begins to recede. The secret archive survives, mostly. You sit together among the dripping shelves, exhausted. Hori laughs weakly. You know, he says, when I die, make sure they bury me with a blank scroll. I'll write my own afterlife. You promise you will. When he finally falls asleep, you walk outside. The first light spills over the river, turning everything to gold. The smoke from the burned scrolls has faded, but the smell lingers. A mix of ash, incense, and defiance. You realize something important. Librarians don't just preserve knowledge. They decide what the world forgets. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous power of all. Weeks pass. The floodwaters withdraw, leaving a thin layer of silt on the courtyard stones, a soft gray veil that seems to hush the temple grounds. Work resumes as if nothing happened, but you can feel the shift beneath the surface. Something has changed in the rhythm of the House of Life. Hori's health begins to fade. He coughs often, his fingers tremble slightly when he writes, and yet he never misses a day. A scribe dies twice, he says one morning, voice dry as papyrus. First when the ink leaves his hand, then when his name leaves the page. You try to make him rest, but he waves you off. We are not builders or soldiers. Our monument is made of words. You stop writing, you stop existing. He still corrects your hieratic script with maddening precision, still mutters under his breath about bad ink and sloppy margins. But his eyes, once sharp as obsidian, grow distant. Then one afternoon, he doesn't come to the scriptorium. You find him in his quarters, seated cross-legged before a small altar to Thoth, a lamp guttering beside him. The air smells of honey and old parchment. His writing board lies across his knees, a half-finished line trembling on the page. The heart weighs less when it remembers. He's still. You kneel there for a long time, unsure whether to weep or write. Eventually, you do both. When the other scribes gather, the temple priests recite the usual prayers. They speak of Mot, order, balance, truth, and of returning to the fields of reeds. They say nothing of the secret archive. You suspect Hori preferred it that way. You, however, cannot let him vanish into silence. That night you slip back into the hidden chamber. The air is thick and cool. You kneel beside the row of jars and take out one blank scroll. With trembling hands you begin to write, not a hymn, not a decree, but a record. The story of Hori, of the burning of the jars beneath the temple. You write everything. The ink runs in places, the papyrus fibers catch. But you press on until dawn. When you finish, you roll the scroll carefully and place it among the others. You label it simply, Testimony of a Scribe. For a long time, you just sit there, listening to the temple breathe around you, the creak of wood, the drip of water, the faint murmur of prayer. Somewhere above, the first birds call over the Nile. And you realize something. This act, writing truth where no one can see it, is not despair. It's resistance. The following week, a new overseer arrives from Thebes, younger, ambitious, eager to impress the royal administration. His first decree, reorganize all existing archives for efficiency. You bow as required, concealing your dread. Efficiency means reclassification, inventory, inspection, things that could expose what you and Hori hid. The work begins. You watch from the upper shelves as workers carry jars, scrolls, and ledgers into neat rows. The hidden chamber remains sealed for now, but each passing day feels like borrowed time. Then one afternoon, you're summoned to the overseer's quarters. He gestures toward the papyrus scrap you've kept since the purge, the fragment in Hori's handwriting. "Where did you get this?" he asks. Your mouth goes dry. "It was among the burned remnants," you lie. "A curiosity." He studies it for a long time, then sets it aside. "Strange words," he says, "but beautiful. Keep it if you like. Just remember, beauty is not always useful." You bow again, relief mingling with anger. That night, you walk to the riverbank and stare at your reflection. The moon glimmers in the water like a spilled lamp. You think of Hori's phrase, "To write is to defy forgetting." You whisper it aloud. The wind carries it away. Years later, because this story spans years, the House of Life changes again. Pharaoh Seti dies, his son Ramesses ascends. Temples are rebuilt, statues renewed, old gods made new again. Time in Egypt is a circle pretending to be a line. You are older now, with your own apprentices. You teach them how to grind ink, how to measure margins, how to keep a steady hand even when the world trembles. You tell them stories, but not all of them. Some truths are too fragile to survive the open air. One evening, one of the younger scribes, clever, curious, dangerously like you once were, asks, "Master, why do we write what others command and not what we believe?" You hesitate before answering. "Because belief fades," you say softly. "Ink endures." He frowns. "But whose truth does it endure?" You look at the lamplight glinting off the papyrus scrolls around you, thousands of voices all speaking through your hands. "That," you tell him, "depends on who remembers to read." The boy nods, but you can tell he doesn't yet understand. Perhaps someday he will. That night, as the temple settles into silence, you return once more to the hidden chamber. Dust coats everything now. The jars are still there, undisturbed. You brush your fingers over their lids, feeling the faint grooves of your own handwriting from long ago. You unseal one, just one, and read a few lines from the Book of the Hidden Sun. The words are luminous still, as if the ink refuses to dim. For a heartbeat, you think you hear Hori's voice behind you, calm, amused, eternal. Still saving what can't be saved, you smile. Still trying. When you leave, you reseal the door and press your palm against the mural of Thoth weighing the heart. "Let this remain," you whisper. "Let someone find it when the world forgets again." Outside, the night is vast, full of stars that look like flecks of gold leaf scattered across black vellum. You lift your gaze to them and realize something simple, something final. Every act of memory is an act of faith. Faith that someone, someday, will listen. Faith that the ink will hold. Faith that truth, however buried, will one day be read again. And so you return to your desk, light a lamp, unroll a fresh scroll, and begin once more to write. Because that is what scribes do. Because that is how the world remembers. The lamps are out now, and the scriptorium lies in darkness. You can almost hear the dust settling, slow, soft, deliberate, as if even the air wants to rest. The smell of ink still lingers faintly, sweet and smoky, woven into the grain of the papyrus and the wood of your desk. Somewhere beyond the walls, a night bird calls once, twice, then fades into silence. You draw a slow breath. The same air that once stirred through the temple thousands of years ago now fills your lungs. It's strange, isn't it? How the world moves on, yet the smallest things, an ink mark, a pressed reed, a whispered vow, endure. The scrolls are gone, the jars are buried, the gods forgotten by most. But their echoes live on, carried in the quiet rhythm of your own heartbeat. The stars outside still shimmer on the Nile's invisible skin. If you listen closely, you might almost hear them, the librarians of long ago, turning phantom pages somewhere beyond the horizon. They murmur softly, careful not to wake the sleeping gods, tracing their fingers over words that once defined the world. And now you rest among them, part of that endless hush. The stories are safe, the ink is dry, the dust is kind. So let it all fade gently now. The rustle of scrolls, the distant hum of the river, the weight of centuries sighing into quiet. Let your thoughts drift like candle smoke curling upward, finding peace in the knowing that nothing written ever truly dies. It only waits to be read again. Good night, scribe. The house of life closes its doors, but its whispers will find you when dreams turn golden.